Welcome to the Anthropology 340, the Peoples of Hawaii course. This is an online course this semester. We're probably going to be doing it online only for the foreseeable future just because it avoids time conflicts for you guys with other classes. The Anthropology 340 or Peoples of Hawaii class is an examination of the various ethnic groups in Hawaii, both their arrival here, their position here, and also the way that they interact with each other and the way that they get in a very complex way stereotyped, especially by tourism. We have a very unique dynamic here that we're going to see during this semester that makes us different than just about any place else in the world. That has both positives and negatives attached to it. And if you've been here for any length of time, that should come as no surprise. But I think the complexity of the social relationships here sort of tends to surprise even locals. So that's what we're going to be looking at this semester: the past and basically present, foreseeable future of how everyone gets along and interacts and doesn't get along and doesn't interact here in Hawaii with each other. Within that context, since this is an online class, this makes it a lot harder for you guys. The tremendous advantage of an online class is, of course, it's accessible. You don't have a time schedule in terms of being in class at a particular time. The downside is you have to be self-disciplined enough to actually get the stuff done on time without the sort of artificial constraints of, being on class on, say, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So you have to be much more self-responsible. The Canvas system you have actually has a calendar function, which I would suggest you use. If not, certainly make sure to use some sort of, calendar function so that you know when things are doing to get them done on time. I don't have a lot of sympathy for people getting stuff done late. There's a million reasons. I've been here for a million years, and I've heard them all, and I don't find much sympathy for almost all of them. So get the stuff done on time, especially early in the semester. On one hand, it's hard to get distracted because this semester is new. On the other hand, you guys have all been around the block at least once or twice. The later the semester gets, the more and more stuff you have on your plate, the harder and harder it is to get stuff done. So I would strongly suggest get as much done as you can up front. Remember, since it's an online class, there's nothing that says you can't get stuff done early. So if that's something that you're prone to doing or think it's a potential possibility, then all means explore it. So let's go through the syllabus really quickly. I'm now not really at Chaminade anymore. I'm just a part-timer. So I don't have an office. I don't have office times. So if you want to actually meet me either in person or via Zoom, and Zoom would actually be easier, contact me and we can set up a time to meet. But I don't have an on-campus location, so just be warned that's something you got to think about. Scrolling quickly through here, the required readings. I've had these for a couple of years. They're very, very good, and they're very, very useful. Most of you, at least in these sections this semester, are involved in one way or another with nursing, as far as I understand. And I would remind you guys, just in case, I don't know how you'd forget this, but especially in nursing, what you're actually doing is you're an interface between technical specialists, i.e. doctors or whatever, and the patient. So you have to be patient-centered, and that's impossible if you don't understand where the patient's coming from. There's oftentimes stereotype, especially in American society, that people are individuals and they have their own way of looking at stuff. From an anthropological standpoint, that's nonsense. People are part of groups. They're brought up in groups. They have a normative set of values and attitudes they follow. And if you don't understand that particular group that person's a part of, then you're almost bound to either make them uncomfortable at a minimum or offend them or offend their relatives very, very easily with no effort on your part, just because of lack of knowledge. One of the main functions of this course is to give you some insight into the various groups here. You won't become knowledgeable of them, but you'll be aware enough of them that you should avoid the major pitfalls, and you'll know where to look for further information if you need it. The two really critical groups here, and of course the most obvious one would be Hawaiians. Hawaiians are the critical group because, one, they're the first inhabitants, they're the first residents, and in many ways, everything that we do, even in the 2020s, is defined by Hawaiian one way or the other. Either it is, or in contrast to, or Hawaiian versus holy, or whatever. Hawaiians are centric to the identity of this place, and they're also centric to the stereotypes of this place. So understanding some aspects of Hawaiian culture, and Hawaiian society, and Hawaiian ethnicity from the past and the present and the future is really, really central. And so that's, a fair amount of the semester early on is very front loaded with Hawaiian, uh, sort of understanding Hawaiian culture and ethnicity. And that's why we spend all that time. Every other group here in many ways is pretty much defined its relationship to Hawaiians, either as a positive or a negative. So handing that foundation was really critically important. In that context, the Tengan book, Native Men, is the only work I've ever seen, the only research I've ever seen that actually looks at Polynesian male identity in the 21st century. And this is really, really key because especially Hawaiians and by extent also Samoans, Tongans, etc., Polynesians in general are incredibly stereotyped by gender. That's not so much their internal stereotypes, but the stereotypes of others, by others of them. The classic stereotype of sort of the tourism industry, the tourism, identity of Hawaiians, females as hula dancers, Hawaiian males as surfers, are sad to say just as consumed in 2023 as they were 100 years ago. Tengan's work on Native men is the only work I've seen that actually looks at how Hawaiians in our world try to identify themselves in the modern world that we live in. And I would point out that this work is not only useful if you're looking at Hawaiians, which obviously is its theme, but would also apply equally well to Polynesians, especially Samoans and Tongans here. It would also in many ways argue would be a very good way to look at potential ways of developing male identity with Micronesian populations, for example, who are facing many of the same situations, in fact, worse in some ways than Hawaiians. So on one hand, it's a study of Hawaiian male identity, but on the other hand, it's not just of Hawaiians. And again, if you're going to be dealing with clients who are male, especially between the ages of 10 and say 40, I would suggest that this is a work that you really want to pay a lot of attention to because it's not as Hawaiian centric as it might seem in terms of the title. The second work is Rohr's work. This is a superb work that she did. She's a sociologist or political sociologist, whatever you want to call it, at UH, I believe. And what she's looking at is both the stereotypes of haulis and also how haulis handle stereotyping and why haulis are stereotyped the way they are, which is very different than any of the other groups. This is a huge bone of contention, either in discussion or in avoidance here, which is something we do a lot of. And so this is a really critical work because it really points out that haulis are a unique population here, and they're a very complex population because they include a lot of very different groups that are all sort of packaged under this umbrella. And so it's a really critical work when you're looking at the 21st century, especially when you look at it, say, in the 2020s in terms of legal issues and the relationship of sort of ethnic social identity in Hawaii in the larger American context in the legal system, sort of the idea of legal rights. So again, a very, very pertinent, very useful work, and for anyone that's going to be living or working here, an absolutely critical thing to have under your belt. The third, McDermott's and Andrade's, that's just here because it's on everyone's bookshelf. You're expected to have it. If you ever get involved in social services, Department of Education, most of the major hospitals, this is the reference that, for example, HR or someone would have. It's a not particularly good summary of all the ethnic groups and sort of main values and attitudes, but it's real erratic in terms of what it covers. The reason I've got it here is because everyone's read it, everyone uses it. And at the level of the counties and the states and the federal government, this is the, if you would, is the Wikipedia template that's used when you're talking about ethnicity here in Hawaii. So you've got to have it just because everyone uses it. So my recommendation for this one is skim through it. Whatever ethnic group you are a part of, read your one in here and feel free to, do editorial critiques on it or whatever, but just be aware that it's what everyone else thinks is norm here. The last is from Thrum. George Thrum was a real interesting character, arrived here in the 1830s with his dad from Australia, went to work down in the shipyards as a boat builder, became a publisher, printer, was fluent in Hawaiian, was one of the major translators for the Hawaiian government, especially in the Kalakaua period, was also, part of the Hawaiian government. So he's a real player in this last period of the Hawaiian, monarchy and to basically the republic and then also territory. as a publisher, he started doing almanacs, which, you know, those things that you have every year, you know, things that are going to happen this year stuff, to increase sales. What he started doing is putting articles in that he or other folks had written, um, both about current affairs, but also about especially Hawaiian stuff, which he was intensely interested in, along with a lot of other folks in the late 19th, early 20th century. He was convinced that Hawaiians were disappearing because they're disappearing as a group. Their culture was disappearing. And so he thought that the almanac would be a way to save a lot of this stuff by basically putting it in print. The problem, of course, is almanacs are something that you throw away because, you know, if you've got the 2022 almanac, what the hell do you need that in 2023? So most of these were discarded. We happen to have a full set here at Chaminade, St. Louis Sullivan Library. And so what I did is I basically compiled all the useful articles out of his almanacs from 1878 to 1934. And that's what you see collected here. You're not expected to read all of them. You're not expected to read most of them, but there is a shopping list of ones that I want you to look at. Most are very short, couple of pages. They're the equivalent of newspaper articles. But the key thing about them is, in many cases, what you're talking about is material that was acquired when it was happening. So either, for example, Ms. Nakawina's, you know, articles about Hawaiian folklore, for example, those were given to her by her grandpa. These folks were alive in the late 19th century when this stuff was, if not common knowledge, was still common, was still relatively accessible. There's still people that actually were around that remembered, you know, when Liholiho was alive, or when Kamehameha III gained his, you know, became the king. And so in that context, these are very much an insight of the times. Now, some of these articles are hard to read because they can be, you know, some like the Chinese ones can be just seriously offensive. And that's fine, because you got to remember that if you're going to look at how people made choices or saw other groups in the late 19th, early 20th century, you've got to understand where they're coming from and that point in time of what they saw. It doesn't do any good to look at them in terms of in political correctness of 2023 about choices that people made in 1910. They didn't have the insights that you have in 2023 and 1910. They didn't have internet, didn't have radio, didn't have telephone, didn't have TV, and lived in an entirely different world. And so the great advantage of the Thrum articles is like time capsules. They take you back to those points in time when the stuff was a lot more relevant, when it was a lot more immediate, and in many ways gives you a huge insight into, for example, if you're local, the type of world that your great grandparents or grandparents or great great grandparents might have come into when they arrived here in Hawaii. And that's something you're not going to get, and you're not going to get it from contemporary writings, because contemporary writings tend to be very much sort of gold plated, you know, very sort of Disney, you know, the world was a neat place and the Chinese came over here to live on Sandalwood Mountain and become successful and raise their families, which is totally crap. But nonetheless, that's the modern spin on it. You look at the Thrums articles and it's an entirely different look at, you know, people's view, for example, of Chinese. But it's real. I mean, that's how people actually viewed Chinese then. And if you're going to understand who we are now, you have to understand the foundations of who we were, or who our great grandparents and grandparents were, that makes us into who we are now. And that's the huge advantage of the Thrums articles. You're not reading very many of them. Go through and you'll actually see the ones that are required. But I strongly recommend that you download all the volumes and keep them. They're only like $1, sometimes something on Amazon. They're digital. I mean, you're going to find them useful at some point or another. That's your reading material for the course. Hang on a second. In terms of grading, the main grading platform for this course are your critical thinking exercises. There's 5 of them that account for 70% of the grade. They're real straightforward. You've actually, let me scroll down here. You've actually got the rubric down here, which tells you what I'm looking for, you know, and even how to lose points. So I have very little sympathy when people screw these up. I want you to find something as we're going through each chunk of material, each of these modules. Find something in that module that you find interesting, either from a personal standpoint that you find personally interesting, or that you can see useful professionally. So, for example, you might want to look at Hawaiian lapa'au practices in particular areas of, say, herbalism. What type of medicinal practices did Hawaiians use? What type of, for example, medicinal prayers What was the role of prayer and chant in healing in traditional Hawaiian society? That would be something you could get out of module one. Now you're always going to have to use more than the materials. You're not supposed to repeat the modules to me. You're not supposed to repeat the presentations to me. I did those. I already know what's in them. You're supposed to go into more depth. So I want you to, using our course material, either the modules or the videos, go into something and explore it in more detail. That's your critical thinking exercise. Check with me before you start. Now I can tell if you're getting in too deep or if it's too vague or it's not even on topic so that you don't go off on some tangent and get them done. If you procrastinate on them, you're going to get hammered for grades. Every semester, they'll get a couple of folks that'll just not get them done at all till the end of the semester and try to submit them late. You're only going to get very small partial credit if you submit them late, which means you're right at the minute at a maximum looking at probably a C, very likely a D, or maybe even an F. So just get the suckers done when they're due. They're not that onerous. They're pretty straightforward. You've got the structure in terms of what I want to see. Just do it. Don't procrastinate. It's a real incredibly bad idea, and it will cost you grade-wise. I'm not doing service learning this semester. That's been a whole nother zoo that we don't have time to get into in this video. So we're going back to classic presentation blog post. Think of these as something where you're going to look in more detail than a critical thinking paper. It can be one of your critical thinking studies that you did. If you found something you did enough of it for critical thinking exercise, but you want to get into it in more detail, that would be a good choice for a presentation or a blog post. The key with these is what I want you to do is look at these as either something you would do as a presentation. So, sort of think of it as like a PowerPoint, Google Slides, or you could do it as a blog post that you post on your website. But visualize this as something that you would be putting up for public consumption for people to see and help them understand something in more detail. So don't do something really vague and sloppy. So this is supposed to be a more focused work than the critical thinking exercise, though it can be based on some of the same concepts, or it can be entirely something different. So again, I think it's here. It's pretty clearly explained. Should be straightforward. In this classes, in all my classes, there'll be a number of videos that I have you guys watch. Prior to watching the video, there will be what I have is a set of questions that I ask. What I want you to do is react to those questions. Those are the reaction papers. You get graded on doing them. You do not get graded on how long they are, how beautifully written they are. Just do them. Again, this is something that's for some reason people procrastinate on, and that just really irritates me because I want you to watch the videos when we're talking about that subject. It really doesn't do any good to watch a video about Hawaiian identity at the end of the semester when we've gone through all the groups. It doesn't have any relationship to the course material anymore. So these aren't make work things. These are designed to provide visual enhancement or visual, depth to the material we're covering otherwise. So get them done when they're scheduled again. Last part is just the real virtual Waikiki field trip. Given that we're now wandering around, I would recommend that you do this for real. But if you're still concerned about COVID or other transmissible diseases, feel free to do this in Google Earth. Again, it's down here in terms of what to do in terms of the directions. Very specifically follow the directions. I got them there for a reason. And then just react again to the points. Let me scroll down here. React again for this down here, the field questions. Write that up, give it to me, and you've done it. None of the stuff in this class is tremendously complicated. All of it will be incredibly complicated if you screw around and don't get it done till the end of the semester, because you're going to find you don't have any time to do it. So, it sounds like a just irritating recurring theme, but get the work done, get it on schedule. So we scroll down here. Here's the schedule with the dates, what's due, do it. Okay. So, if you have any questions, email me, contact me, and I'll post it. If it's something I think I've missed, or I screwed up on, or I think everyone should know, I'll probably send out an announcement to everyone. So that should be it. Hope you enjoy the semester. Hope you enjoy the class. I think it's an incredibly useful class, even if you're not from Hawaii, because again, our ethnic relationships here are very, very complicated and very, very different than any place else. We're not a poster child for how to do it. In many cases, we're actually a nightmare. But understanding that is really critical, I think, in the increasingly complex digital media, digital social media world we live in. So I think this is a really valuable class, and I think if you are interested in it, you'll find it's a real worthwhile. valuable source for you.